I'm Tyler Keefe, Diane Chabon also with us, and so is Matt Catoni, our sports reporter, whose voice you'll hear every Friday night alongside me on our broadcasts of West Bloomfield Laker football, including tonight, a big game coming up following a 36-44 loss last week on the road in Clarkston. The Lakers head back into northern Oakland County, just a little ways away in Oxford, to take on the Oxford Wildcats in their final OAA Red Division matchup of the season. Matt, last week's game against Clarkston was a really interesting one because at certain points it seemed like the Lakers and Clarkston were going to be battling it out, and it was going to be a prize fight that would go all 10 rounds and come down to a last-second decision. Then at other points it seemed like the Lakers were going to get ran off that field, ran out of town, and have some explaining to do before coming into this week against Oxford. And all of a sudden, in the waning minutes of the game, the last 3.5 to 4 minutes, Lakers started to make a comeback there. We saw a lot of good and a lot of bad last week in Clarkston.
Yeah, really, it all goes back to what we've been saying throughout this season for the Lakers. It's just playing a disciplined and clean game of football. They had some key mistakes in last week's game. We saw that snap go over Rick Nance's head last week after, seeing some bad snaps the week prior. So that's going to be important to see the Lakers really try and minimize those mistakes as they head into the last OAA meeting of the year.
Yeah, Rick Nance last week against Oxford, 19 for 31, 228 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Those 2 interceptions, and you can maybe give one to Oxford as being just great coverage on their side. The other one was kind of just a last-second bomb pass at the end of the half that was intercepted by Desmond Stevens. But nonetheless, Rick Nance has been fantastic all season long. In fact, with the chaos of the end of the game last week, I failed to mention during the play-by-play that he actually surpassed the West Bloomfield High School record for career touchdowns, surpassing Bryce Beasley's 46 career touchdowns with 3 touchdowns last week, bringing him from 44 to 47 overall, which is a new school record. So congratulations to Rick. But this is a team that has a lot of boom potential on the offensive side of the ball and is really tough to go up against on the defensive side of the ball, which makes this another interesting matchup tonight against Oxford, a team that loves to run the football, a team that's got a talented rushing game in their own right, led by Luke Johnson, who's a guy that averages over 6 yards per carry, and also a young quarterback in Jack Hendricks that's shown some potential of his own, similar to sophomore quarterbacks we've seen earlier on in this season have some success against the West Bloomfield Lakers. What do they need to clean up tonight, Matt, in particular, to make what on paper should be a pretty simple and easy game for the Lakers? But they're going up against a team like Oxford that always plays hard, plays a tough brand of football, and has given some teams that have given West Bloomfield trouble, like Stony Creek last week, a lot of trouble in their own right.
Yeah, you really mentioned how Oxford wants to run the ball, and that's something that the Lakers have really struggled against this year. We saw them against Chippewa early in this year really struggle to stop the run in the second half. And last week we saw them struggle to stop the run. So that's going to be interesting to see how they really combat this Oxford offense. It's really going to try and rely on that run game with a young quarterback. And really, force the Lakers to, like I said before, play a disciplined brand of football and not really try and extend themselves too much and make big plays.
Yeah, a lot of really good athletes, too, on this Oxford team. Chock full of multi-sport athletes. Eli Carpenter's a baseball player. Jake Champagne, a baseball player also. So is quarterback Jack Hendricks, a shortstop for Oxford. And Jay Cady, who's their kicker, also plays at defensive back as well, can play a little bit of tight end and wide receiver. This is a versatile team that, in particular, in the trenches, is very veteran. For a team that's kind of young and back on the rise, a lot of juniors in their first season as starters or varsity players, sophomores in leadership positions such as Jack Hendricks at the quarterback. I take a look. I'm looking at my spotter chart on my screen to my right here. Charlie Campbell, the right tackle, senior. Brendan Cass, the right guard, junior. Their center, the quarterback of that O-line, Aiden Munson, senior. The left side of their line also, left tackle, another important position, a blind side lineman, Sean Wilson. He's a senior. Lucas Strohmeyer, their left guard, also a junior. And that's going to be the key matchup, I think, tonight, Matt, is the matchup between this Oxford offensive line, veteran in its own right with several starters returning from last year's team, and those that are coming up already having great seasons in their first season as a starter or first season on varsity, going up against the West Bloomfield Lakers and a D-line that is not only great on the edges with Jonathan Gabriel and Brandon Davis-Swain, but we're seeing some key players like Kamari Pittman in the middle also having a really big impact in the backfield over the last several weeks.
Yeah, really. You mentioned how Pittman has had a tremendous impact, and that's really a story that I found interesting with this Lakers defense this year. You have some star-studded names like Brandon Davis-Swain, Jameer Benjamin, a lot of these D1 talented guys, but it's really been the guys like Brody Pecor and Pittman that have really stepped up and helped make this Lakers defense so dominant this year.
Yeah, Pittman on many of those assisted tackles and sacks last week, and Brendan Davis-Swain has not necessarily to say turned a corner because he's always been a great D lineman for the Lakers, but kind of has had an even more inflated impact than usual over the past several weeks, and looking for a lot of the same tonight. The Lakers take on the Oxford Wildcats on the Blue Field in Oxford. Kickoff is at 7 o'clock. Our coverage will begin with This Week in Laker Football at 6 o'clock, followed by the Laker pregame show at around 6:30 as well. Matt Catoni and I will be on the call, and our whole team out on site at Oxford also for tonight's final OAA Red Division matchup. And for the Lakers, Matt, look, they're out of the race in the OAA Red Division. There's no way under any circumstances, no matter how these last 3 weeks of the season chalk out, that they can win the OAA Red Division. But they're going up against a tough schedule over the next 3 weeks. Oxford tonight, Southfield A&T comes to West Bloomfield next week, and arguably their biggest matchup of the entire season for the Lakers, and then they finish off against Oak Park. So now the big question goes from winning the OAA Red Division to positioning yourself in the most opportune spot for the playoffs. You think about Oxford, a team that's gone up against Lake Orion and has gone up against Utica Eisenhower and Clarkston, and will go up against U of D Jesuit. That's a lot of playoff points that are up for grabs tonight, and next week especially against Southfield A&T, especially if they come into that game with a win after this week. This could be a big 3 weeks for West Bloomfield, particularly for playoff positioning.
Yeah, really. And you mentioned the importance of playoff positioning and the points that are going to be available these next 2 weeks. But really how I'm looking at it is especially just how you can use these next 2 weeks as a measuring stick as you try and build yourself to hopefully a state championship title roster. Southfield A&T is one of the best teams in the state. They have one of the most talented rosters that you're going to see the entire season. So it's going to be important to see really where you stand at this point in the season, late in the season, as you get ready for the playoffs.
I take a look at last season with the Clarkston Wolves, 10-2, 10-3 overall, and they came into the playoffs with 2 losses. They made it all the way to the state semifinal where they ultimately lost to Caledonia. But you can make it far into playoffs. You can position yourself really well, especially out of the OAA Red Division, if you finish the season with 2 losses. So these next 3 weeks got to be 3 wins for West Bloomfield if they want to have a home playoff game, and they want to be really well positioned for a long run in the playoffs where some of those other power players, maybe like we saw last year when the Lakers had that interesting first round matchup against Cass Tech that many question the validity of going into that playoffs from the MHSAA. Could other power players take each other out and position West Bloomfield even better, given that they have 2 losses? The only way that happens is if they go into the offseason with just 2 losses, or worst case scenario, they got to get at least 2 out of these last 3. That all begins tonight. Nothing along those lines matters if they don't come out of Oxford with a win. Again, that kickoff is 7 o'clock. Our coverage begins at 6 o'clock with This Week in Laker Football. And Matt, not only on the gridiron on Friday nights are Lakers making impacts, but on Saturday and Sunday as well. Any updates from our alumni at the next level?
Yeah, let me make sure that I have the time right on this. I saw recently that Trey Mosley is planning on having a meet and greet. It's going to be this Sunday at the Lefty's Tea Steak off of Telegraph Road in Waterford, Michigan. And he's really had a, interesting season so far. He's had an impact for a really lackluster Spartans offense. He's really made his presence felt, and just really an unfortunate turn of events so far for the senior year, though.
And we're continuing to see other other West Bloomfield alums like Samaj Morgan have big impacts on the University of Michigan. Of course, Donovan Edwards there as well, and Matthew Judon at the professional level, also continuing to make the Lakers green and white shine at the next level and representing the anchor very well. Matt, we appreciate you joining us today.
Yep. Thank you for having me.